Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have today in our studio, Joel Garfinkle. This is our virtual studio that Joel is joining me in. And one of the reasons I'm so delighted to have Joel is because of his book, Executive Presence. And I hope that we get to dig into that topic in some grand ways, because it's often a question that those thinking about their authentic selves, their authentic presence, have inquiries about or have questions about. And beyond that, Joel is recognized as one of the top 50 executive coaches in the United States of America. Global Gurus named Joel number 14 on its list of the top 30 global coaching experts. He's a master certified coach, the highest level of achievement in coaching, and author of 11 books and 300 articles on leadership. So, Joel, I'm just delighted to have you here. How about, could you say a few words about yourself to the audience?
Let's see. I would say I've been doing the executive coaching work for 23 years, and I was spent some time in the corporate world before that, and recognized that my authentic self showed up the most when I was doing some form of coaching. And I didn't know the name of it at the time, but then I left the corporate world to join the field of coaching and have done it for 23 years. And in that experience, I really have felt an authenticity and an alignment to work that has really captured my passion. And I felt very much like a fish out of water throughout my education, in my school, and growing up in the school system, and even in the work world. And then all of a sudden, when I started coaching, I felt like, oh my God, I feel like I was a fish that found his water, and felt very aligned and to the work I do. And so I've loved this work. I love working with individuals and leaders inside companies and helping them with their leadership challenges, and also going inside companies and helping corporate trainings and having a larger audience of people and helping them with certain issues or challenges that they're dealing with, like an executive presence and not being able to show up fully themselves in the work environment and being held back for certain reasons.
Just as we dig into your current book, Joel, Executive Presence, I am curious, do you have a particular niche that you work on in terms of companies, in terms of types of leaders or executives? And what would you say about that? Or how do you think about that?
I have worked a lot in the biotech industry and the high-tech industry. And I think the reason is because I've worked with a lot of scientists and engineers. And I think that they need help in the work environment. And I feel I'm drawn to the underdog and the people who are being held back for whatever reason in the work environment. And I feel like a lot of the tools and processes that I've created over the years have been really helpful for them. So I think about those demographics and that industries, and also, women, minorities, introverts, people who tend to be overlooked and underutilized, and how can they have an upper hand when they might be not showing up as fully themselves in their work environment. And so I am drawn to that type of leader.
It's interesting. We often don't talk about place here, but I was thinking about biotech or biopharma and technology. That makes me think about the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's where I'm from. I was born in that area and lived here my entire life. And yes, so I am drawn to those type of demographics and environment. Yeah. But it's interesting because you take a certain leader inside these type of environments, they have a very strong skill set, a competence, an expertise. And so they can do really well. But as they rise up in the organization, what got them here may not be what's needed to get them there. And I think that can be a harsh reality to recognize, well, what do I need to take that next level of success that I'm wanting that goes beyond my certain expertise or knowledge that I have.
Well, Joe, what is executive presence and why is it important?
Well, executive presence it's really about radiating confidence in your interactions and in many situations that you enter. So it's communicating with conviction and clarity, not having ambiguity or hesitancy in what you are trying to say. It means being bold and decisive decision maker and coming across as really competent and professional. I would say someone with executive presence has a reputation for making things happen. And they are respected as an authority. And they earn people's respect, not because they demand it, but because they command it. They have a sense of command and how they're coming across. So leaders with executive presence exude a certain magnetism that grabs people to them, that people lean in and they want to listen to them. And it's important in organizations to have executive presence. And the reason I find it so important is because as you rise in an organization, you realize how much having an executive presence is a necessity. Leaders are paying attention to who has executive presence and who doesn't. And the ones who do have it get promoted. And it plays a central role in a leader's career progression and promotional opportunities. So I find that the higher the stakes, the more you need that power and presence.
Is it charisma, Joel, or that's something different, right?
Charisma is a piece of it, but it's interesting because charisma, I feel, can be a word that people say, oh, I'm not charismatic. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the 9 competencies that make up executive presence. But I would downplay charisma to lessen its weight. And if I had to define charisma, it's more about, do you have a positive attitude? Are you able to get people interested in what you're trying to do? Are you able to get people excited? And are you able to draw people towards you? That could be charisma. So it's a component of it, but it really comes down to, I think confidence is a core component of radiating that confidence in the interactions you're in, and be able to show up and work in that, making sure that how you show up and how you speak and how you make decisions, that you are cultivating a sense of strength and power and conviction, that people believe in you and feel that you know what you're doing.
So it really comes back to these 3 key executive presence domains that you introduce about radiating gravitas. I love that word. It's very rich, radiating, and so is gravitas.
Yes.
It's a way of thinking about presence, isn't it?
Yes.
So another way is acting with authority. And, I'd like to uncover that. I think that's around decisiveness, and I'm not quite sure, but, and then about expressing yourself fully. And I think in the context of, integrity and authenticity, when we think about authentic, sometimes, it's the real deal. It's the genuine article. And that's a way that we begin to think about those topics. So in this model that you have around radiating gravitas, around acting with authority, about expressing yourself fully, how did that come about? What is based on observation? Tell us about the model.
Yeah, the model's come about because I've I spent a lot of time over the years observing a lack of executive presence in leaders I've coached. And I saw a pattern of what was happening. And based on working with over 1,400 executive coaching clients and then over 7,500 workshop participants, I started to see a very common theme of what executive presence actually is. And I was able to take those three kind of concepts or domains, as you alluded to, is, radiating gravitas. Okay, what are the three competencies that make that up? Well, it's about being confident, being commanding, and being charismatic. And then I look at authority, and acting with authority is really about being decisive, bold, and influential. And then expressing yourself fully is about being vocal, putting yourself out there. And when you are vocal, making sure you're insightful and you're clear, you're succinct and to the point. And so this model really has come from many different leaders I've worked with over the years. And I started to put together this information based on the workshop participants I interacted with and the coaching clients, and combined it. I started to see a pattern and put that together into this model. And it captures something that I feel can be very nebulous and hard to define, which is executive presence. And so I like having a very simple model where it's like, here's a 3x3 model, here's 9 competencies. As a leader, look at these and say, how do I rate on each one of these? Which one am I strong in? Which one am I weak in? You can take any leader in any organization, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a CIO, whether it's a VP, or whether it's a director, and you can look at this model and find, where am I rating myself, and what are the competencies I need to improve on, and which ones am I doing really well?
Now, is executive presence just for, and I don't mean just, but is it for leaders, or why would a company want employees with executive presence?
It's a good question. I find that you want to be able to build a leadership pipeline. And so having a strong foundation of executive presence as your leaders are moving into middle management and beyond is really important. And as they step to the next levels of leadership, that requires a higher and higher degree of executive presence. So as they're moving forward in their career, it's going to be more of a necessity and a requirement. I often find that, the companies that need employees with executive presence are often the hidden leaders. So every company has these hidden leaders, and I consider them the low profile leaders that are unrecognized and maybe appreciated inside the company. And leaders, they feel somewhat invisible. During talent reviews, executives will say, I have no idea who that person is. I've been meeting with them, but I never really hear from them. They're more hidden. The company loses out on this unused talent. And so it can really boost retention and engagement when you're able to take hidden leaders and help them with their executive presence and become more prominent and more valued inside the organization.
Well, such an important skill then for everyone to embrace and adopt if you're interested in, growing your career, whether that's vertically or horizontally, or feeling a sense of satisfaction with being able to express yourself fully, one of the executive presence domains. Joel, I'm sure you've observed and you've experienced. In fact, in executive presence, you've documented the kinds of behaviors that undermine leaders from exuding executive presence. Could you talk briefly about those 5 actions, behaviors that undermine executive presence?
Yeah, the 5 are, and this is based on research, me interviewing and actually doing a survey based on 1,400 executives. And it found that the top 5 are, number 1 is indecisive. And that's often appearing indecisive, tentative in decision making. The second one is timid. And that's kind of, you're hesitant, you're unsure of yourself, unassertive and kind of complacent, maybe in group settings. Especially when there's more dominant personalities, you might be more timid. Lacking confidence. You aren't as confident in yourself and what you're saying, And so it's a behavior that immediately tells other people you lack executive presence when you're showing an inability to be as confident as you need to be. The next two are too verbose. Now, this is an interesting one because yeah, it's interesting because you might think like, well, I'm an extrovert or I'm really good with my words, and so I'm really verbose. But what happens? How does that undermine executive presence? Well, it can undermine it because what if you're rambling, you're long-winded, you're compulsively speaking with no clear purpose? Well, people look at you and say, I don't know that that person can show up as a leader with executive presence in the work environment, because when they're too verbose, they're undermining their self and they're coming across as lacking that behavior that's needed. And then the last one is being quiet, more quiet, reserved, soft-spoken. And that causes people who don't know you well to assume that maybe you're not engaging and passionate. So these are some of the key things that if you find you're doing these behaviors in the work environment, any leader, any employee in any company, if you tend to be even slightly quiet, too verbose, you lack confidence, and that shows up in how you're showing up in the work environment, you're maybe a bit timid, or you're indecisive. These are qualities and behaviors to watch out for because they are directly undermining executive presence and how people are perceiving you in the work environment in ways that aren't showing up as an authentic, powerful leader with a strong presence.
And so interesting, Joel, that, having read your book, I know that you greatly value introverts, and some of the characteristics that you just described, people might associate with introverted, with introverts. But I think that you have more to offer on this topic and why it is so important for introverts to grow their executive presence.
Well, it's interesting because I'd have to say that extroverts do have an advantage in displaying executive presence. They seem more confident and at ease with people and in their interactions. And they can sometimes establish a strong presence in meetings and make their voice and ideas heard. Now, in contrast, introverts, they do struggle to speak up and radiate confidence. And that's a key element of executive presence. So I prefer introverts not to be limited in their work environment. But the truth is, when it comes to these situations, I have introverted clients that I'm coaching say to me in meetings that I didn't really think anyone would want to hear my thoughts. And so I refrain from speaking up because I think people won't feel my opinions are important, or because I'm unprepared. And so one of the biggest challenges introverts have is they have to overcome their self-doubt about their ability to radiate executive presence. And they need to speak up, and especially in meetings. And I find that introverts, when I start working with them directly, they begin to realize that they have great ideas and they should absolutely be sharing them, that people actually want to hear their thoughts in the moment, not after the fact. And that as an introvert, leverage your smart analysis and critical thinking skills, which is some of your strengths. And your input will be more greatly appreciated and valued when you come from that mindset. So the key thing for introverts is stop self-censoring yourself and trust yourself to participate in the dialogue during meetings. And so I really think it's important that they put a stake in the ground, own a position, and with a calm firmness, show they have the strengths to state what they think and stand by it.
Yeah, so, I think yes, I'm sorry, please.
Go ahead. No, please.
I think, I was reflecting as you were speaking about, when to ask a question, when to intervene. I thought about this early in career. If I wouldn't say anything until the end of the meeting, it was often that I wasn't present in some ways. Sure. And I had very helpful advice from a consulting skills teacher on that topic about when it's appropriate to intervene. I've only seen it work well with one person, and he's a Nobel laureate, and he can have the last word, and everybody still pays attention.
Right.
But I think for the rest of us, your advice is so sage, and it really comes to something that most of us don't know how we're perceived, especially in terms of evaluating our executive presence. It can be very reaffirming and reassuring to get some unsolicited feedback about presence. But why is it so important to gain this feedback, Joel?
The reason is because most people in the work environment don't know how they're perceived in the company. And if they tell me that they've done a 360 feedback report in which people have provided feedback to them, they might know how they're perceived generally in the company, but do they really know how people in the company perceive them for having an executive presence or not, and whether they have a low or high degree of executive presence? So to be anointed as a leader with executive presence, you first have to be perceived as one. So what I recommend is that people really do ask questions and understand, how am I being perceived in this organization? And some of those questions they can ask is, am I being perceived as having an executive presence? In what ways do I show up that show that I have an executive presence? And what do I do to undermine my executive presence? And how can I improve it? And even taking the 3x3 model and 9 competencies, I recommend sharing those 9 competencies with the leader and ask them these questions so that you can be able to get that direct feedback going over those 9 competencies. So before asking the questions, share those 9 competencies, and that will be ensuring that you're evaluating the 9 of them and identifying which ones you maybe excel in and which ones you might need to improve on.
So when I've received stranger feedback on different occasions about presence or about a reaction, and really, these are naive reactions, the words that people often use to describe the words that these strangers often use are someone who's calm, someone who's confident, and someone who's competent. Where do those fit into the world of executive presence, do you think? Certainly competence.
Yes, competence is obviously a core component of executive presence. I think calm has to do with, you radiate calm. That means I can rely on you. I feel like there's a quiet strength. And when people can feel that quiet strength, that means they believe in you and they feel like I can rely on you. And so if you don't have that quiet strength, and you might be tentative, and you might be hesitant, and you might be unsure, and you might come across in ways where you're not really speaking up and sharing your thoughts and ideas, that calmness, that I can rely on you and know that you know what you're doing. And that gets to the third point, which is competence. So competence is like a foundational element that you just have to have. And from there, the confidence is a key component that people believe that they can rely on you because you have that confidence and you show that you know what you're doing. And the calmness is really a quiet presence that says, I got this.
And it's really wonderful, how you've chosen these very descriptive words and terms to underlie the 3x3 presence model, starting with gravitas and authority and expression, but going down: confident, commanding, charismatic, decisive, bold, influential, vocal, insightful, clear. All concepts and ideas that I think bring a certain clarity for action, to create a call to action, a call to improvement, a call for reflection, perhaps, to think about it in those ways. And is it that the sweet spot of executive presence, does it lie between too nice and too aggressive? Is there a balance between these extremes, or how do you explain that?
It's interesting because executive presence is not about intimidating others or appeasing them. People who don't have executive presence often come across as being very nice, but unassertive. And conversely, those who possess a high level of certain qualities in the executive presence model, but not, can come across as maybe even arrogant or aggressive and even intimidating because they're too confident, they're too bold, I just had a leader get feedback that instead of communicating sentences with an exclamation point in their verbal communication, which is being so emphatic and so clear and so defined and so confident, that they said, you got to tone that back a bit. You got to have a little more question mark behind it, and not be so forceful. So there's two extremes, but both come from possessing, you got to have a balanced range of these core executive presence qualities. And the sweet spot you're trying to find lies between being too nice and ineffective and a pushover to being too aggressive and kind of arrogant. And there is a sweet spot between that I find can be really helpful.
That's great. Wonderful to think about it that way. And let's, our world, more and more of us participate in Zoom mediated teleconferences. I mean, how does all this play out in this world?
It's not so different, the 9 competencies we've talked about, because in the Zoom world and in working virtually that has become more and more prominent, you still have to hold people's attention. And it can prove even more challenging on a Zoom meeting than in person. You're not seeing the person throughout the day, and so you need to really make an impression when you do interact with them. It's a small window. And it's similar to when you meet with really high-level senior executives and you have that small window to make a really strong impression. It's important to make sure that you're coming across in a way that does exude confidence and command and charisma. And so when you're on that virtual environment, how can you project your voice, lean into the conversation, really pay attention so that you can speak up and share and add value? So you are being vocal and you're being really clear and succinct and to the point, and looking for opportunities with that sense of authority, of being bold and decisive and influential on these calls, on these opportunities, on these meetings where they are virtual. So you can't hide. Often I've heard people say that the person who's speaking up more is the box in that Zoom box that's showing up more on the screen. So if you're quiet and you're not speaking up very much, you're not going to have much visibility. So it is important to get your voice out there and recognize that you want to show up. And in that virtual setting, it's even more important to lean into some of these executive presence competencies.
Well, so important, Joel. And I have so many more questions, and I'm going to ask a few more of them. And in the meantime, I just want people, as you're hearing all of these points that Joel is making, be sure to check out Joel Garfinkle's website at garfinkleexecutivecoaching.com. That's GARFINKLE, executivecoaching.com. It's a great way that you'll find out about Joel and what he's doing. And you'll also be able to find it, and we'll have this in the show notes for everyone so that, if you're not going away right now, JoelInspirationalSpeaker.com. 2 ways to get in touch with Joel. But let me go back to these important questions before you visit GarfinkleExecutiveCoaching.com. And Joel, why should people get your book? I mean, I have 100 referrals that I would make to executive coaches who are helping with clients on this very salient issue. But why should people get your book, Executive Presence? I mean, what are people going to learn?
Well, one of the things I find, when I wrote the book, I really wanted it to be an actionable guide that doesn't just explain executive presence, but it walks you step by step through exercises and strategies so you can cultivate each essential element of those 9 competencies. And so these 9 competencies has a dedicated chapter focused on for each one of them, and so that you can take action steps for developing it. And so most people have found it that when they bought the book, they said, this is a great resource that I go back to again and again, because I can select a competency, and at that point in my career, or at that point in that specific month, I find I can go to a specific competency like competence and see specifically how I can improve in that specific area by identifying that chapter. There's also an assessment to evaluate how others perceive your executive presence on a 1 to 10 scale for each of the 9 competencies. And so you can then know what to focus on. And you can ask your colleagues, manager, other leaders in your organization how you're doing with your executive presence and get feedback from them. So I find that the book is a good resource and has a very actionable guide to it that allows people to apply the 9 competencies based on their situation, their role, and their position within the company.
Well, it's so important if you really want to exude professional magnetism that influences people at all levels of an organization, up, down, across. And I know that people will be able to read more about that and to learn more about that at garfinkelexecutivecoaching.com. And Joel, as you also think about cultivating and developing executive charisma over time, what advice or guidance would you have? I mean, I don't think it's something that we do once and forget about it, right?
Well, what I would say is that the key part for leaders is to recognize that the higher up they go inside an organization, and as they rise, their executive presence must keep pace with their growth. And so the higher the stakes, the more you need that power and presence. And so I find it to be incredibly valuable to make sure that you're methodically working on each one of these competencies so it equips you with the abilities to have that so that you can go into your work environment, step into your power, convey confidence, and really lead with conviction. And that's what you're wanting to do. So at all times, be able to take that back into your work environment and make sure that you're moving from any passivity and self-doubt that you might have to really a self-assurance and a bold decision-making and really a self-assured presence that is necessary as a leader inside an organization.
Joel, and if people wanted to learn more about these, really the blueprint for executive presence that you've authored and now anchor in the world about radiating gravitas and acting with authority and expressing yourself fully, how would people get in touch with you to talk through these issues and to talk about these issues and to take action on them?
Well, one is you can get the book. It's on Amazon. So you look up Executive Presence and by Joel Garfinkle, and you can get the book there. And as you said earlier, you can reach out to me, Joel at garfinkelexecutivecoaching.com. Be happy to answer any questions you have. If you listen to Mike's podcast and you say, hey, I have a question about some of the things that were discussed, I'd be happy to respond back to you and give you any feedback or guidance or direction. So it's an opportunity to reach out and make sure that don't delay working on your executive presence for a future state, because it's going to become something that's really relevant for you much more quickly than you realize if it isn't today. And so I'd rather you have these 9 competencies being developed. So when it comes time to have a very important need for it, you've already been prepping yourself and developing this competency in your own development. And so that you're prepared for whatever comes your way as you're continuing to have more impact and value in your organization.
Joel, I know our audience appreciates your generosity. Please be in touch with Joel at garfinkelexecutivecoaching.com. And Joel, I'm going to give you a few words to wrap up before I say thank you and sign off to our audience. So, Joel?
I will just say this, that executive presence matters. When 400 CEOs were asked how they choose their next level leaders, 89% of them said they looked for one particular trait, and that was executive presence. It's a quality that is crucial for professional success. And I find that you don't want to be in a situation where you're holding yourself back and you're not showing up with all of your power and all of your confidence and all of your conviction because of either a situation or a circumstance related to the work environment you're participating in. You really want to show up with all of your power and presence and make sure people feel your impact and value that you're bringing to the organization. So you're maximizing what you're getting out of your work environment as a leader.
Well, Joel Garfinkle, thank you so much for being a guest on Authentic Change with Mike Horn. And everyone, if you want to take a deep dive into executive presence, there's no better person to help you than leadership expert, speaker, and author Joel Garfinkle. And I encourage you to learn more about Joel by visiting his website at garfinkelexecutivecoaching.com, or to be in touch with him, Joel at garfinkelexecutivecoaching.com. So until the next time, for all of our listeners, stay well. Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership, and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.